Hi, this is Tay with Thinking with Tay. And today we have a very special guest, somebody I have known for a very, very long time. Actually, he was one of my mentors early on. We won't want to put our age out there, but it's been a long time. I've probably known him since I was about 10 or 11 years old. Long time. And so I am ecstatic to have him here today, none other than Dr. Johnny Scott. Hi, Mr. Scott. How are you?
I am fine, ma'am. How have you been doing?
I have been doing wonderful. It's so good to reconnect with you. It's been so many years since I've been and lived and around in the area of Hickory. But I would be remiss if I didn't bring you to Thinking with Tay so that the people can get to know you and who you are and the things that you've done in our community for many, many years. I'd be remiss. So I am so honored to have you here with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to see you and all that you've done and all you're doing. So I just want to be a help in any way I can.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. So for our listeners, we're going to be covering equity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion, other known as I'll say in the world as DEI. Very hot topic in the world today. But diversity and equity inclusion, DEI, in the workplace and the community. And so Dr. Scott is well versed in this area. He currently serves in the capacity as coordinator of community outreach and engagement for the local community college there in Hickory, North Carolina. And again, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started, but I want to introduce to some and reintroduce to others Dr. Johnny Scott. So Dr. Johnny Scott lives in Hickory, North Carolina. He was born and raised in Lake City, South Carolina. He is the son of Richard and Senara Scott. He attended the public schools of Florence County School District number 3, graduating from Lake City High School in the class of 1977. Over the course of his educational journey, he received an associate degree in criminal justice from Florence Darlington Technical College, a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Gardner-Webb University, a master's degree in public administration from Appalachian State University, and a doctorate degree in leadership studies from North Carolina A&T State University. He has also studied at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He and his wife, Toni, have a blended family of 5 children and 3 grandchildren. He is a member of Greater Faith Missionary Baptist Church, where he serves as a deacon, and is a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, Incorporated. Hear ye, Dr. Johnny Scott.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.
Absolutely. Again, my pleasure. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started on this topic. Very, very interesting topic. So you currently serve as coordinator of community outreach and engagement at the collegiate level. Can you please share with us what your role is primarily and what it consists of?
Primarily, my role is I go into minority communities and I try to educate them as to what we have here at our community college. One of the things that has presented itself is the lack of knowledge in minority communities of what's available at community college. The days are gone when community colleges were just trade schools. And you may be well aware of the fact that this particular community college in our county, your home county, has always had a certain image with it, that it wasn't very appealing to minority communities. And so what I have been trying to do over the past few years is go into the communities where maybe the reputation of the school wasn't as well accepted as it had been over the years, and to let them know that the environment here is very welcoming. It is this past year, I think we had more African-American graduates than we have had in the past, and in the past, at least the past 13 years that I've been associated with the school. And I don't take any credit for that, but I look at it as the fact that people are becoming more aware of what's available here, and taking the opportunity to explore their options here. And so essentially, all I do is go into minority communities and educate them as to what's available here at CVCC.
Excellent, excellent. And that's Catawba Valley Community College for those that do not know what CVCC stand for. And
Yes,
you're
I
right,
apologize.
growing up in the community, I would say, well, at least I'll say for me, let me just speak for myself, but yes, I can agree and attest to the fact that it's probably a step that was really overlooked for some. My idea of college at that time was four-year institution. It didn't seem to me that the community college or the local community college would be an avenue for me to start my educational career. And maybe because it just wasn't really that well known in our community as an avenue. I know that, you know, my mom has had taken classes at CVCC, you know, throughout the years, and ultimately she did graduate from Gardner-Webb University. But so I knew of some people that kind of started that way, but again, I mean, in our communities, it just wasn't well known about, hey, start your educational career here. So it's great that you are in the position to provide that outreach, to provide that information to really communities that were, I'll say, underserved or just not knowledgeable of that avenue. So excellent. I'm so glad that you're there to do that.
Well,
So let
I
me
enjoy it.
ask you. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
No, I was just going to say, because I was telling someone today that, you know, I worked in, I guess, various communities long enough for people to at least accept me to some degree. And so it's good to be able to bring that message or bring a message to them that hadn't been promoted to them before.
Absolutely. Excellent. Excellent. So moving on a little bit more into our topic, can you describe to me from your perspective, I've seen it described so many different ways. I've seen it as EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, or I've seen it as primarily DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Can you describe for our listeners what that means to you? Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, essentially, DEI is a framework, and I talk with my hands a lot, so just forgive me. I apologize.
Oh, no, no problem at all.
Okay, I see it as a framework that's constructed by policies designed to promote equity amongst groups of people who have historically been discriminated against and kept out of various areas or institutions because of their race. And so, you know, to describe DEI itself, it's not one single thing. You know, there's a very broad picture to it, and to
Yes.
try to go into it would take us maybe two days. You know,
Yes.
but I see it essentially as a framework for
Yes.
schools or even organizations to work within to promote programs where those people who have historically been discriminated against and excluded are accepted.
Are accepted. I love that explanation, and you're right. Just coming from, well, I have a diverse background, but just most recently, even in the corporate realm, there are positions, particularly with respect to vendor and supplier relationships, where there are departments fully focusing on supplier diversity and inclusion. And it's important simply because their diversity brings a different perspectives for me, you know, to the table, different cultures, ethnic experiences, etc., which is really what we need in any corporate institution, nonprofit organization, in the community in general, because America is comprised of people of all ethnicities, race, and cultures. And I think that DEI is certainly important at every table, at every table. So let me ask you then, why do you feel that it's important for institutions to implement DEI in their respective companies?
Well, number one, it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And alluding to what you just said, it's good business.
It's great
It's good
business,
business.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Because you're bringing in people with diverse backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
and those people have talents that you could tap into. They have perspectives that have
Mm-hmm.
not been viewed or heard before. And
That's
so
right.
if you are a business, that's what you want. You don't want the same mindset to continue for years because everybody's looks alike and everybody thinks alike. You want people from different backgrounds and different views to help promote your company, to help be a part of your company, to help build your company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. I agree with that wholeheartedly, because if we think about it, the population that most corporate entities or just private enterprises or business or government organizations, just in general, any organization, any entity, they service a population that is diverse for the most part. So you want to have people on your staff or in your company that can provide, information that can address specific needs of those communities or those ethnic groups. So I wholeheartedly agree with that and your perspective on the incorporation of DEI in these institutions. So let me ask you then, what do you feel is I'll say the root cause of racial disparities or the lack of diversity in some institutions?
Trying to go there, huh? Okay. Fear.
Fear.
Fear. That's the root cause. The idea by the broader society
Mm-hmm.
that if opportunities are extended
Yes.
to the people that they have kept down over the years or for generations,
Mm-hmm.
if those opportunities are given to people of those races, that they somehow may get a foothold and
Mm-hmm.
acquire something that
Mm-hmm.
the dominant group has. And if they acquire enough of it, they then might become the dominant group themselves. And if they become the dominant group, there is a fear that they will do what was done to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my, as phrase as it might sound, in my own personal opinion, fear drives it.
Fear drives it. Wow. Again, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Fear, is something, and it's commonly known as false evidence appearing real. People can create scenarios in their minds that scare them to no end without having any substantive information to warrant such behavior. And honestly, the lack of knowledge and I'll say education with respect to understanding cultures can be really a detriment to any company or any person. And so I think it's important for us to embrace all cultures and really have at least an open mind with respect to understanding people for who they are as individuals. Um, we do know historically African Americans and other people of color have been disenfranchised and just kept out of rooms where really out of fear and for some other reasons, we just inherent reasons that we really can't explain, and there's nothing that we really can do about it. But I totally agree. I think fear is really the root cause of it. I really do.
And
So go ahead. Mm-hmm.
no, I was simply going to say, because when you look at it from a sociological perspective,
Yes.
people then instill, and we talk about, and I sometimes hate to sound too pessimistic, as I know I can sound sometimes, but we talk about, getting rid of racism and things of that nature. And while it is possible, I believe it's possible, I don't see it as being likely anytime soon. Definitely not in the remainder of my lifetime, because it's been passed on to generations and it keeps going. And at some point in time, you know, and I'll touch on something that you just said, education.
Yes.
Until people are educated about various groups and various races and ethnicities, as to the reality of who they really are, that fear and is transmitted on and on and on to the next generation.
Yes. Yes. I agree. I agree. And you raise a really good point. And just again expounding on education. I really do believe that that probably is really going to be the remedy to, or at least one of the remedies to sort of eradicate racism and fear with respect to diversity and understanding different cultures. It is education. What do you think, I'll say from your professional experiences, other than education, is there any methodologies that companies can maybe try to implement within their policies or what have you, that they can somewhat, do to help, I'll say, improve even the disparities?
Well, I think it depends on the company. And I
Okay.
think companies have to examine themselves and see where they are,
Mm-hmm.
because the needs may go deeper in some companies more so than others.
Mm-hmm.
But I think definitely education and training
And
are two
training.
components that have
Mm-hmm.
to be in place. And in order for those to come about, there has to
Mm-hmm.
be buy-in from the
Mm-hmm.
top.
Buy-in from
If
the
the
top.
person at the top or the people at the top don't buy into it, nothing will happen. And
That's
so
right.
definitely education and training, but there has to be acceptance and a
Mm-hmm.
buy-in for the idea that we have to change at the
Mm-hmm.
top. And if that doesn't take place, then you'll keep on getting what you've always got.
Yes, yes. And you're right. It starts at the top, leadership down. So a lot of times when you go into an establishment, and it may not be, it could be a franchise, a restaurant or what have you. Not to name them, but there was a restaurant years ago, I remember, that a lot of I'll say different ethnicities uh, frequented, but there were lawsuits filed against them for discrimination, and my understanding, these were franchised places,
Hmm.
and overall though, the corporation, the corporate at the top, may have not, I'll say, embraced these ideologies or discriminatory practices. But if you have franchises that, or franchisors that essentially implement these type of disparities, it makes the whole company look bad, because they're not looking at the individuals. And I think it's important, simply because, as you said, the leadership as a whole, to implement certain policies and procedures that even their franchisees would have to comply with. Because it is unfortunate, because day to day, there's different experiences that people of color, and maybe those of Caucasian persuasion, do experience as well. But unfortunately, historically, it has been the disenfranchisement of people of color in these establishments. And you're right, it has to start at the top. You have to start top down and implement those certain policies and procedures that are, that are inclusive, and
Yes.
can appreciate that while money is green, that money comes from different ethnic groups that, keep you guys afloat. So excellent, excellent. I agree with that. There's been, what I would say, a shift with respect to the priority of DEI. Um, it seems like there was this big sort of interest that the country had with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion after the George Floyd, excuse me,
Mhm.
incident, where he lost his life, unfortunately. And it seemed to be, even with the Black Lives Matter movement and that, particular group and organization, it seemed to be that corporations were interested in understanding the needs of the African American community and being more inclusive about that. But it seems to be, I'll say, in the last year, or maybe a little bit more, a slight shift, and the priority of their diversity, equity, inclusion is just not paramount anymore. Um, have you seen that? Do you feel that there is a shift in, with respect to DEI as a primary focus for organizations?
Oh, very much so. I think particularly in education, there was a shift in the political climate
Mm,
that brought it about.
okay.
Um, and I initially saw it when I was at Texas Tech,
Okay.
and and not trying to get into politics
Sure.
so much,
Sure.
but but you saw branches of the legislators
Mm-hmm.
become members of one party,
Mm,
and when they gained control of the legislature,
mm-hmm.
you saw policies towards DEI begin to change.
Mm,
And I think
okay.
because of that particular shift that came
Mm-hmm.
about, in part because America, if I can say this, America was allowed to become comfortable
Mm-hmm.
with its racism and
Okay.
its history.
Mm-hmm.
And people were no longer afraid to, I'm getting too far at that now, I know, but I'll pull it back in.
No,
People
you're
were
fine. You're fine.
people were no longer afraid to display the attitudes and behaviors that had
Mm-hmm.
been so archaic in
Mm-hmm.
our country in our country in
Mm-hmm.
regards to race. And
Mm-hmm.
the shift that came about because of that, politically anyway,
Okay.
um, brought about, I won't say a fear of
Mm-hmm.
DEI, but certainly the idea or notion that it wasn't respected anymore. And because
Mm-hmm.
it's not as respected, it wasn't as accepted, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore it was rejected. And so I think,
Mm.
in essence, and all to be more direct to your question, I think the political climate um, that changed, and then I won't say what period that was,
Right.
uh, but the shift that came about during that time brought about a
Okay.
rejection of DEI.
Wow. Wow. And I can certainly understand it's no different than when any or different administrations come in with respect to even at the collegiate level or in the corporation, and there's a change of ideas. So not necessarily just, as you said, we're not getting into politics here per se, but in when you usher in new administrations, there come different beliefs and ideas and focuses, and I can agree with that. I certainly can agree with that. That certainly had an impact on the shift or the lack of priority or interest in DEI. Wow, wow. So then how would you address the argument, I'll say, and we're moving on into like work environments. Um, I understand that there's a different shift with respect to DEI where even there's an argument that, well, it's not really that much needed anymore because a lot of people are working remotely. So what's really the interest in having DEI, or I'll say it's not of paramount importance anymore because we're not working together inside and as a team in close proximity. People are working remote. Do you feel that there is still a need for diversity, equity, and inclusion with corporations and different organizations, um, regardless of the remote status, work from home status?
I think it's even greater.
Okay.
I think it's greater. And I hear that, and I liken it to the cell phones that
Mm,
we have today.
okay.
I think people are as disconnected today as they've ever been, primarily because of cell phone, because we do so much in our phones. Um, personal interactions are very important. We are people that have to interact with each other.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you cannot understand a person unless
Hmm.
you're interacting with them. And I told somebody today, a young man today, an emoji doesn't tell me anything.
Not at all. Matter of fact, it can be misinterpreted.
Very true, as is often the case. And,
Yes.
and so I think when people work from home,
Yes.
even though they're seeing each other on the screen, there's still a disconnect.
There is still a
And so,
disconnect.
and
Yes.
because there is that disconnect, there is not the opportunity to get to know people and things of that
Mhm.
nature. And so
Mhm.
I think DEI, in regards to people working from home, is very important. It can't be denied is how important it is, because again, we have to be interactive. And
Yes.
I don't mean texting to you.
Yeah,
No,
right.
yeah, we have to be interactive. And
Yes.
until we are, we can't understand people or their differences. And if we can't understand their differences, and we can't appreciate them or their
Mhm.
differences. And so I think it's as important today with that particular group or sector as it is
Yes.
any other field.
Wow, wow. And I can see that. I can certainly see a need for that still. I don't think that it lessened as a result of it. I know people got comfortable being at home, but you still, get on the camera and you're looking at people, and diversity still makes a difference there because you're still sharing viewpoints from, different, ethnic groups and experiences. So I agree. I don't think it should have shifted. But I know that that argument is there, well, it's not
Mm-hmm.
really a priority anymore because we're not rubbing elbows, anymore. We're not sitting at the boardroom table anymore, So why is there a primary focus, or why is it still important or relevant for us to focus on DEI? But I agree, it's even more important. It's just as important. So, wow. Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
agree. So, given the expansion, and I'm gonna get into gender identities here, um, given the expansion of gender identities and expressions, some institutions are finding it difficult to implement policies that accommodate everyone's needs. And with respect to I'll say it's new. It used to be like even the LGBTQ community. Now it's plus, and we're getting into all kind of different identities and people describing themselves, and with labels that a lot of institutions are trying to get caught up to. um, there's even, they're talking about cisgender roles as opposed to what we would historically just say male and female. And I know that comes with biology, and of course you and I neither one are doctors, so I don't even want to go down a rabbit hole with respect to that. But it's been difficult, my understanding, with respect to certain institutions in trying to accommodate policies that not only diversity and inclusion from a racial standpoint, but now gender identity. I imagine that it's hard to kind of interpret. Have you heard of this being a major concern?
Well, yeah, I've heard of that, and I guess it is becoming a great concern to some people. But it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to something you mentioned earlier, and that we
Okay.
discussed a little bit earlier. It
Mm-hmm.
comes back down to education and training,
Yes.
and that has been something that people have not been willing to do or put forth on this particular topic.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you start talking about groups, the LGBTQI plus, um, you are talking still about minority groups.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about people, a group of people who is, when you look at it, I guess in the broader sense of things, that they are a small sector of the overall population.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they are entitled to the rights of any other minority group. And
Absolutely.
so I think the idea um, comes about that companies or organizations, entities have to promote education and training with every group, not just racial groups.
Right, right. I agree. I agree. And it's interesting because I have found and heard that it's difficult to because not only with just implementing certain policies and accommodations, but there's been sensitivity around individuals who historically do identify as female or male, and it's not an intentional thing to describe a person who visibly look to be of a certain gender, even if it's mistakenly, right? And so there's a bit of sensitivity there where people, it's a litigious society and it's like, well, you need to, call me this and what have you. But sometimes it's not just education. I think sometimes it could be just a lack of knowledge and experience in that particular area or lifestyle. So I would say that yes, certainly I've heard the difficulty with respect to implementing certain policies and procedures to make it all inclusive for, as you said, gender, identity, and race. I certainly understand that there is an importance to include that, but I think also the argument, and if I'm being fair, is it's not that we want to be exclusive. It's just we're trying to get up to speed with these new identities and to try to embrace it. So I find, and what I found with some corporations or organizations is that, wow, we want to make sure that we're not certainly not intentionally offending, but unintentionally just because of lack of knowledge. But again, it goes back to education. And I think that that's certainly important and probably the key to remedy a lot of these concerns. So
because I mean, the thought comes to mind, their money spends too.
Their money spends too. That's right. That's right.
And
Absolutely.
it has their dollar, their $1 has no more power than mine. Mine has no power than theirs. And then they deserve everything that comes with it.
Absolutely. Another area of, I'll say, DEI, there's been some concern with respect to ageism. And I've worked with people, and of course, you see the gray in my hair. So I started graying very early, really 13. I saw my first specks of gray on the sides of my head. But there's been some concern with respect to, or an argument, another side to DEI, at least with inclusion from the perspective of, I'll say, more of our senior level, not senior level employees, but senior as in age. And so they're feeling like they're not being fully considered for opportunities and being pushed out because of their age. Have you heard that being a concern with respect? And if so, what have you heard that corporations or companies do to sort of remedy that concern?
I've heard that kind of expressed by some people. I don't think that corporations have really focused on it a lot.
Okay.
I think I don't really believe. I don't know if I believe that corporations even accept the idea that they are discriminating somehow against people because of age. I think as a society, we have been taught to look at gray hair and see that as an indication that this person needs to retire. They are no longer valuable or of service to the company or organization. I had lunch with a young man today, a former student, and he said something. I forgot exactly how he put it about somebody being 70 and retiring, needing to retire. And I said, but dude, but they're probably still good.
Yes.
If they can do the job,
yes,
why make them retire? To tell you, I just turned 65 a couple of weeks ago.
Wow,
and
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
And I feel good. Of course, my knees kind of hurt in the morning, but and 65 was almost seen as the death knell in companies for a long time.
Yes, for a long
But
time.
but I look at the older men, like I look at men like Buffett. Warren Buffett is what, late 80s?
Late 80s. Pushing.
And yeah, still kicking, I mean, killing it.
Yes.
And so so there has been this notion of over the past maybe decade or so that people, because of their age, they're not valuable anymore.
Right.
But I'm willing to suggest that people 60 plus,
yes,
they're more loyal workers, they're harder workers, and more productive workers than younger populations. And so
And
let us do our thing. Let us do our thing.
can you do your thing? And I'm not far behind you. I'm really not really far behind you. Yes, you was a mentor of mine. You have me by a couple of years, but I'm not far behind you. And especially, people see, and although they say, well, gray hair is a trend now and people are, wearing it, but mine is all natural. But, I agree. Being an attorney, as long as we are competent and can provide adequate representation, we can be attorneys until we're near grave, to be quite honest. And there are attorneys who have never really retired. And so I agree, as long as you have the capacity and the competency to perform, then I think that your job shouldn't be taken away. So getting into, I did a little bit of research on this about what they call unconscious bias, or in other words, like social stereotypes about certain groups of people, despite a person's own experience. And understanding that, at least per my research, that it plays a major role in organizational leadership and advancement opportunities. Simply because if we look at Fortune 500 companies or just companies in general, I think it's around less than 4%, 3% that's led by people of color. What do you feel we can do again? And I think education is going to keep pushing here. What do you think that we can do to sort of eradicate this, or at least provide, I'll say, more diverse leadership at the senior level with different corporations and
I
organizations?
think there has to be the notion of, of allowing people to, promoting people and putting people in those positions. All too often, and in my own view anyway, people are not promoted because there is the perception that, and again, that you mentioned it being some biased perception that a person cannot perform a senior level position because they are of a certain race.
Yes.
And it's education, training, and things of that nature. I think interactions go along with it as well. But people have to be made aware of their biases.
Yes.
And that many times is where people don't want to go there. And most times, if somebody doesn't push them there, they're not going to go there. And it's uncomfortable, but that's what we have to get to for people. People have to see where they really are. And until they see that, I don't think that they will see that the fact that they are denying people opportunities because of race is a part of their psyche. And so I think we have to, education and training and things of that nature, but we have to be willing to accept, criticism or whatever you want to call it, the fact that somebody calls us out on our stuff.
Yes. And that is so true, because a lot of times the unconscious bias, they may say, well, I don't see myself as being that way. Well, precedent shows, and numbers don't lie. There's not really a lot of diversity at the senior level with corporations and different organizations. And while they may feel that that's not something that they are consciously aware of, that's where unconscious bias comes into play. And that's the argument that a lot of, employees or people who are employed in different capacities feel, knowing that they can, and it's disheartening because they know that they can provide and produce at that level of leadership, but just not having the opportunity to do so is usually the problem. One of the remedies in what I've heard and understood in my research is that in order to combat these type concerns and issues is that people are opening up their own businesses and hiring their own people, or just diverse people. But, you know, in order to get to the top and be in a leadership capacity, they are establishing their own businesses. And that's why I said in terms of the percentages, the numbers have increased. I'll say they said in terms of over the last 10 years, in terms of leadership at the top, but that comes from self-employment and creating your own business as opposed to trying to climb that sort of corporate or organizational ladder to senior, because it's going to take you longer. That's one of the arguments that I understand is the or at least the argument or the movement with respect to how you can combat these type concerns or issues.
Yeah, I think a company or an institution has to really question itself if they look at senior management and there's nobody of color there. They have to question. I think they should question themselves as to why is that? Because it's how can you deny that, particularly when you have I would say a fair number of racial and ethnic minorities. Why is it that nobody is in a senior level position?
Right.
And I don't know if companies do that. You have to look at the landscape, look and examine, you know, who's there and who's not there. Yeah.
Yes.
We can't have a number of Black people working for, or people of a certain race work for us, and nobody is competent enough to be in senior management.
Right. Yeah, you have to take a look at that, because if that's the case, then why are they employed with you? Why are they on project teams and maybe project lead, but can't be the department manager? You know?
Yeah.
So they're obviously bringing to the table a lot of different ideas, but they can't seem to just break that, you know, sort of leadership of corporate veil leadership, you know. So interesting perspective. So you have had extensive experience. I looked at your resume, which is impressive to say the least. Listeners, let me tell you something. Dr. Johnny Scott have done some things. You hear me? Done some things, sat in many places, in many organizations, served in various capacities. So with your extensive and diverse professional experience, where you've worked as a police officer, a juvenile court counselor, a college professor, substance abuse counselor, among other roles, many of which you have directly served and interfaced with the community. So, do you feel that communities are better served by organizations with a diverse staff or that have diverse staff and employees? And we kind of touched on this earlier, but especially with respect to like community organizations, especially when you're serving underprivileged communities, would it be your perspective that it's whenever you're going out to provide outreach in those communities, that your staff is reflective of the population that you serve?
Oh, it's necessary, you know, very necessary. If, you know, if we're going into those communities, because one of the things that kind of came to mind when you're talking just a second ago is when I was a police officer.
Yes.
And, you know, we know that the primarily in Hickory, at least back in the day anyway, the Ridgeview community was where the bulk of the African Americans lived in Hickory.
Yes.
And I relished working in Ridgeview. I did. It was, you know, it could be the most active part of town at almost any time for a lot of people. But for me, it wasn't. Because I was one of only, at that time, I think I was one of only 2 Black cops who were on the street.
Okay.
And I approached Ridgeview with a different perspective than did white officers.
Okay.
And I would see white officers go in, and then they felt they had to be this way and be that way. And so they would talk in a very harsh manner that people just wasn't accepting. And I think people accepted me
Mm-hmm.
because I knew the perspective.
Yes.
And the thing that I found was that a lot of white officers weren't willing to try and understand the perspective.
Mm.
And that now this is a whole other topic. But
Sure.
that again goes into training
Mm-hmm.
because police officers weren't trained to try to learn other perspectives. There was
Mm-hmm.
the law enforcement way, the police way, and that's the way
Mm-hmm.
you did things. That was a textbook thing that you did. And
Yes.
it drove a wedge between communities and
Mm-hmm.
police officers, law enforcement. I try to be accepting, and I think that's what
Yes.
people have to be. I guess I'll say I try to make myself last. I try to make
Mm.
myself last.
Okay.
And if if I can do that, um, if I can put people above me, that really has gained me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if I still exist, or have any relevance in any kind of way, and I may be teasing myself, you're kidding myself here,
Mm-hmm.
but if I have any measure of relevance,
Mm-hmm.
in my local community, is
Mm-hmm.
because I I try to put others before I put myself.
Wow. Wow. I think that's one, I think that's selfless. Two, I think it's very necessary. It really is with respect to going into and trying to understand different cultures. I think that's commendable. I remember you bring to mind just from those statements raised. I remember an organization that I worked with years ago. And I remember being, and you and I actually have one thing in common. We worked for the Department of Juvenile
Mm,
Justice. I believe you were the
mm,
second African American hired. I was the third. Or maybe you was the
mhm.
first, and then another girl was the second, and I was the third. But I
Yeah. Mm,
remember, and out of a 25-year history, but I remember in one of the organizations that I worked for, I saw that there was a need because, and the reason why I raised that question with respect to if you're serving communities, right, and you're doing outreach and performing outreach, the population that you serve being diverse, I think that the staff is important. It is certainly important for the staff to be diverse as well because that's where you can try to relate. Now, remember
mhm.
raising at one of the staff meetings we were talking about how we can better serve the community. And I raised the point that I think that we need to undergo cultural sensitivity training
Mm,
because as you raised in the Latin American community, there's different ways that they move in terms of family. And as you're saying, maybe with respect, in the Asian, and I remember in Hickory, there was a large Hmong population at that time. And I remember the organization that I worked for, I said, we need to, in order to better serve these various communities, we need to understand what these cultural, excuse me, differences are, because we may be moving textbook, but you may go into a home and they seem to be yelling at each other, but really that might just be their culture, right?
yeah.
And so you're
Yeah.
going in saying, oh well, you're being disrespectful, and they're saying, no, this is how we talk. And
Hmm.
so I felt the need to have cultural sensitivity training, and that organization, to their credit, they adopted at our monthly staff meeting, they adopted this sort of effort and task to look within those communities leaders who could come in and train us on the culture.
Mm,
And I
mm,
thought that was very effective. And honestly, now that organization has a more diverse staff and
yeah.
has hired multiple people of color at the same time. And again, I was the third one and only one at that time. And I felt that that was so much of a need to do, because we can be violating or certain cultures and perspectives and ways without even knowing. So that's
Yeah.
why I thought cultural sensitivity training was so it was of paramount importance then and now.
I agree. I had a meeting, I had the opportunity, I think about a year ago, to go to a meeting of that particular group.
Mhm.
And I was blown away as to how diverse they are now. Never would have imagined, never would have imagined.
Never, but they are
Yeah.
now, and I am extremely proud of the efforts. I think, we were kind of the new ones and
Hmm.
experienced maybe other things, but now I can say I'm pretty impressed, by the inclusiveness and the perspective and understanding the need for diversity, especially with these type organizations that provide outreach and touch and go into homes and communities and schools. I think it's certainly important that DEI is at play there. So
Well,
we're drawing.
thank you to you. Thank you to you for that. I did not know that that was your idea, but thank
Oh,
you to you. So
yes,
they,
it
yeah.
was little old me, 23 years old. But I was like, come, this is how we can serve. I usually am a person that speaks when it's necessary. I don't have to be the one that say, oh, look, that's really not my thing. But if it's, something where I feel like is a need, even with this platform, it's really to educate. And that's the reason why I even started thinking with Tay. I just felt like with the information that I've learned over the years and my professional experience, social, personal experience, I felt like I don't believe that you should just hold that. And we all don't know when our last day on earth is. I just felt like this is what I wanted to do with this platform, is to educate and hopefully bring awareness to some degree and with different areas and topics, and so I thank you for even being here today to even provide your perspective, really. So do you feel, and we're drawn to a close, do you feel that there is a need for organizations to, I'll say, well, some people don't want to even go to, with respect to um, numbers. I think when we talk about the need, and I really don't want to get too far off topic, but there's been landmark cases now that with respect to quotas in school and affirmative action and that type of thing. And I think now, since the shift has been, oh well, we no longer need to have that. There's no longer a need with respect to meeting certain quotas. And it's basically being ruled unconstitutional. And some institutions have chosen to move in different directions and saying they're just basing it off of, education scores, experience, and the fit for the school. But I find it interesting that they say, well, there's no need for affirmative action, but there's a lot of nepotism that's still going on. So in some
Mhm.
on some applications, they talk about, they ask, well, did your parents go to school here? Right. So whether you call it affirmative action or something else, there are still methodology that's being used in order to get certain people into schools,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
yeah, I agree. I agree. And until you can convince me that nepotism doesn't exist anymore, then keep your hands off affirmative action.
Hmm.
And that's just my own personal view. I don't know if this idea, this notion of quotas um was ever I know for some people the idea was there, but there were still ways put in place to
Hmm.
keep people of color out of positions.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And everybody could say, well, we had to meet this number, had to meet that number. There were still ways because the numbers weren't being met.
No,
They were
no.
not being met. And so there were still ways to get around it. And, yeah, I have no shame. I've never had any shame of accepting a position if it was because of my race,
Hmm.
because people had no problem. disqualifying me because of my
Because
race.
of your race. Yes.
And so yeah, you call it whatever you want to, affirmative action, whatever the case may be. I was always proud to present myself as I was, and I want to believe that I was accepted as for
As
those
you
reasons
are.
because as I was.
Mhm.
But I do know as well, in the same organization we were talking about
Mhm.
earlier,
Mhm.
I was rejected 3 times because of my race before I finally got hired.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's
Wow.
so
So they
nobody
have
worried.
come a long way.
Oh, good. Yes.
They have come a long way. Really, they
Yes.
have come a very long way.
Yeah.
I tell you what, this has been a pleasure. I mean, we have talked about a lot of different I'll say factors with respect to DEI, and you've brought a whole host of knowledge and experience. But is there anything else you feel like we haven't covered that maybe our listeners should maybe even appreciate, maybe when applying for jobs or when they're sitting in their offices and they feel that they're being looked over or what have you? Is there anything you think or that you could share with them, just being your personal experience, the experiences that you've had where you've been looked over? Is there I'll say, some type of information or I'll say encouragement that you can provide to our listeners with respect to how they move in their different capacities?
Well, I think the thing that comes to mind first is something my 5th grade teacher, Miss
Okay.
Peggy Davis, told us on the last day of school of 5th grade.
Mm.
I came up in a segregated schools essentially,
Mhm. Mhm.
and we did not fully integrate until in the 6th grade. And
Mhm.
one of the things that Miss Davis told us on the very last day of 5th grade, that never let anybody think that they are smarter than you or that you're
Wow.
dumber than them because of
Mhm.
how you look or what you present. And the thing I've always gotten out of that is that when I'm going into a position, and I tell people this, when you know what you know what you know.
That's right.
And don't let anybody convince you otherwise because of how you look.
That's
And that's
right.
the only thing I would tell people is that, we may look different than somebody else, but they're no smarter. And I'm no
That's right.
dumber.
That's right. That's right. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for your time today. Really, is there a way, being as though you do serve and provide outreach, is there a way that our listeners can contact you if they want to understand more about how to get into CVCC or maybe the services that are offered there? Is there some information you'd like to share or even a website?
They can contact me, send me an email if they like at
Okay.
jscott@cvcc.edu. Or give me a call at 828-327-7000, extension 4743.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Scott, for being here. This has been a pleasure. It's been great catching up with you, and I am so grateful for the work that you provide in the community. And I tell you what, if I have never told you before, you, Vanessa, and all of them back in the day, growing up in Ridgeview, and you guys been a part of our rearing with respect to just exposing us to things, an organization that you served and you provided mentorship, you guys have helped a lot of us move in the capacities and the leadership positions that we're in today. And I'm telling you, we owe a lot to you guys. You guys made it wonderful. We were educated, we were exposed, we became knowledgeable, we became conscious because of a lot of things that you guys did. So, again, it's been a pleasure to reconnect with you today. And I certainly am honored to have you and have had you here on Thinking with Tay. I really
Yeah,
am. So
pleasure's
thank
been
you so much.
mine. Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you again for just taking time to sit and listen to a lot of different things today that Dr. Scott shared on with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please remember that you know who you are. You know that you are skilled. You deserve to be in the rooms that you walk in every single day. Don't let anybody make you feel that you don't deserve a seat at the table. As a matter of fact, create the table and bring others along with you. Okay? So remember, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm only asking you to think. So until next time, goodbye.